When The Simpsons debuted on TV in the late 80s, it proved a lot of things about animation and television, the most important being that it can relate to adults. With this fact, an industry of animation specifically geared towards adults started to boom across the 90s. Some concepts failed to find an audience, some failed to find a network entirely, but the ripples of this trend still exist due to the most popular shows becoming icons of television. Ironically, one that wasn't very popular during its run has managed to stay entertaining after all these years because it knew exactly what it wanted for its audience. That show was The Critic. With everyone using the internet to share their opinions on media, including me right now, the phrase, "everyone's a critic," is pretty much common knowledge. But we weren't always watching films with a firmly cynical lens, and this show is about a man who's practically from our time, living in New York on the cusp of the information age. Jay Sherman is the kind of protagonist who says it how it is, pretty shocking when the show was in production, but is now practically the code that young adults live by. Does this mean the show's aged out? Absolutely not. It's the sort of show that should be given more attention by fans of animation and sitcoms because it was never really given a chance. Let me explain. In December of 1989, a little show debuted you might know as The Simpsons. It did a lot of things for television, but the one thing it did to shape this particular show was making movie parodies more mainstream. The show loved to poke fun at needless trends in cinema and had more on-the-nose spoofs of iconic sequences, especially during seasons 3 and 4, whose showrunners were the Critic's creators, Al Jean and Mike Reiss. Although they're not my personal favorite seasons, I'm more of a 6 and 7 guy myself, they had an excellent balance of unpredictable comedy and world building. Think about how many characters got their first real starring roles during this era of the show. Jean and Reiss knew how to develop fictional ideas. As the 4th season ended production, a lot of Simpsons crew left for greener pastures, or less yellow pastures, and Jean and Reiss decided to develop a new show about a short, grouchy film critic played by comedian Jon Lovitz. They had a lot of ideas to stick on the wall, even thinking of making it live action, but they settled on animation because that's what they knew best. The show was picked up for a 13-episode season by ABC and began airing on January 26, 1994. It bombed! Reviews were generally positive, but the show failed to draw an audience even half as big as The Simpsons, and that show had gotten a little over 4 years of budget improvements under its belt. It was quickly decided that ABC wasn't going to be the Critic's home after it ended its first season. The Fox network then took the show for a second season of just 10 episodes, but also a crossover with The Simpsons to boost its popularity. This sadly had the opposite effect, as Matt Groening, creator of The Simpsons, strongly opposed the crossover and talked down on it to the press. While the crossover has remained popular with fans, The Critic did not initially, since it ended its TV run at just 2 seasons and a mere 23 episodes on May 21st, 1995. And as if any more salt could be added to the wound, a 3rd season of web episodes were published online in the year 2000. The idea was far ahead of its time, but in a bad way. Almost all the original show's cast was missing, and the flash animation made everything feel slower and lower quality than the TV show. I won't talk about it in this review much, but it's worth bringing up as another example of this show's poor luck. The complete series was eventually released to DVD in 2004, and this little set has allowed the show to maintain a cult following. Granted, all the episodes are on YouTube, but can you resist giving Simpsons writers more money? I mean, think. My personal experience with the show is the same as most fans born after the show's cancellation. I watched the Simpsons crossover, not knowing that this character had his own show, but I don't think many others found out about its existence through YouTube poop. Yeah, I'd say this 10-year-old Beatles YouTube poop, which uses clips from their songs, ironically has had more longevity than The Critic, one of its sources. It's fine as far as early YTP goes, but enough beating around the bush. Here's what I think about The Critic. Now here's something I don't typically do. I'll review the title sequence. It starts with a beautiful view of New York City, with the World Trade Center in view. Let's add it to the list. After a few more establishing shots, Jay Sherman's woken up by either his phone or alarm clock with an unlucky message.
Hello?
Nico, it's Roman!
We then see his daily life in New York, then his latest review subject for coming attractions, where he just says,
It stinks!
This is a nice, welcoming title sequence, with 2 running gags that keep it from getting stale in marathons. That's what a good intro does, reminds you of why you like what you're watching. The show centers around this daily life of Jay Sherman, a divorced man in his mid-30s whose job is to hate films. He has a show called Coming Attractions, where he generally pans Hollywood blockbusters, and because of that is the source of scrutiny from time to time by moviegoers. He's also got a very busy personal life with a pushy boss, a rich family that doesn't love him, a kid who goes to a school that pushes diversity, and later on a southern girlfriend who's also divorced with a child. There are a number of facets to this show that never feel underdeveloped or outstay their welcome. The family-work balance is tied because on one hand, you know who Jay Sherman is, but on the other, you still know who Jay Sherman is. Since the show ended its run so quickly, there are some minor plot threads that have never been tied up. In particular, the penultimate episode, Dukerella, is about Jay's boss and girlfriend Alice's sister marrying. This is quite the interesting development, and it's kinda sad that this is where it ends, since the very last episode's a clip show. It seems like they would have wanted a potential season 3 for 1996 to have stronger continuity, and that belief should give you the clue that the show is pretty episodic. Jay's exploits, no matter how wacky they get, manage to be self-contained. He's always back to his hosting job on Coming Attractions with a clip from a movie that I'd actually want to see ironically. In terms of characters, you've got a dozen of varying memorability. Jay Sherman, the critic himself, is certainly fat and desire-driven like Homer, but clearly an intellectual. He tends to make slightly more rational choices, yet can be selfish or snarky on occasion. These aren't bad things, it builds character, and Jay stays a likable protagonist. His son Marty, by contrast, isn't really defined by much, other than an admiration for everything Jay does, and going alright at a United Nations-themed school filled to the lid with stereotypes. Hey, it was 1994. People were more forgiving of cultural representation on TV as long as it existed. Not keen on Ardith, Jay's ex-wife, who feels like a bummer, and I guess that's why she doesn't appear much. They get a few good jokes out of her, but they would have taken a lot of effort to pull off. The other side of Jay's family includes a rich couple of adoptive parents, Eleanor and Franklin Sherman, and their legitimate daughter, Margot. Eleanor can be a bit hard to love at points, but she can usually get a laugh in when black comedy's the name of the game. I'm sure for the wrong reasons. Franklin suffers from Alzheimer's and is prone to spouting non sequiturs, but he has some hidden strengths that change depending on the episode. However, given his condition, that's a given. Margot is more soulful and caring of Jay's exploits, but she didn't get enough time to spread her wings like Lisa did. But still, I can tell she's smart because she owns a horse. The people Jay works with include Duke, the owner of the corporation that broadcasts his show, and can be that stubborn rich boss when the situation calls for it. His sheer power and success is what makes him such an entertaining character. He's also got a makeup artist named Doris. Remember Lunch Lady Doris from The Simpsons? Same voice actress and everything. It's fascinating how they technically borrowed a character from the other show, but not one of the great ones. Jay also hangs out with Jeremy Hawke, a smoking hot Australian actor who's there to be a supportive friend. I'm a Kiwi, but I wouldn't mind sharing a line with him. He's what a show like this needs, a genuinely nice guy. Season 2 introduced Alice to be a girlfriend for Jay. Generally, I dislike new adaptations to stable casts, but Alice injects a little more love into the show, helping to make Jay feel more special. Helps that I'm a sucker for southern accents. She also has a daughter, Penny, who didn't do much, but did she need to do much? Last of all is Vlada, the owner of a restaurant. I saved him for last because I don't like him that much. It's not that he's a stereotype, it's that I don't know if they wanted to make him a friend to Jay or another shady tertiary character. He didn't have time for a spotlight episode like Mo or Apu, so he just sort of stayed there, being sketchy. I still think that each character was given life and effort by the writers and voice actors. There are more hits and misses because of that. The types of stories this show dishes out are not out of the ordinary. A lot of the earlier ones are your typical sitcom plots, like a kid's first date or a feud between mother and son. As things go on, they branch out into wackier antics, like Eleanor and Franklin getting stuck on an island, but the way characters think and act keeps them grounded. These are people you'd meet on the street, not cartoon characters. This makes it a lot funnier when they're pitted against living movie parodies because it's easy to see how you would react in such situations. Now, movie parodies, the critic is addicted to them like heroin. They range from spoofs of classics like Casablanca and The Sound of Music to more modern fare like Jurassic Park and The Mask, or modern for the time. I've always wondered how Jay would feel about the state of movies right now. I mean, the show already made fun of a possible sequel/reboot flood we're stuck in the late 2010s, but there are other avenues worth exploring. Reboot potential aside, since most of the more cutting-edge films being spoofed have aged well, the show doesn't feel dated on the movie side of things. But they love bringing back certain celebrity jokes well beyond their in-show expiration date. If I hear a Marlon Brando impression one more time, I'm gonna karate chop a bomb shelter. Other types of jokes are the kind you'd expect on The Simpsons, but I'd argue the show is a little more cynical. Mostly because Jay, especially in season 1, doesn't have a very easy life. But like The Simpsons, there is some great satire to be found. I especially have to point out the gun vending machine joke in the episode Miserable, and how its only security is asking if you're a criminal. You Americans and your skimpy gun laws. But seriously, a joke like this wouldn't be on a pseudo-family-friendly show now that wide-scale shootings happen every couple months, and the jokes about the UN score are anything but timeless. But I'm smart enough to know this show's a period piece and not let it bother me. In terms of animation, everyone moves about the same way as Simpsons characters, if a little slower at points, but the art style takes a little longer to get used to. The backgrounds are never quite as detailed as you remember them being, and in terms of character design, the eyes are puny in Season 1. Because of this, jokes about how ugly Jay is don't land since he's one of the most appealing characters. But in Season 2, there are some tweaks to make everyone look younger and livelier, and that included making features more defined. It's for this reason I prefer Season 2 to 1 by a hair, despite the writing quality remaining consistent. But individual episodes are a little more of a complicated story. The good news is, since there's only 23 of them, I can get through them all in a single video. So hey guys, Employee A Million here, and welcome back to every episode of the Critic Reviewed. Starting off with the pilot episode, what I like here is that it naturally introduces you to Jay's life as he's dating his new girlfriend, a Hollywood actress. But a rift builds in the background since he has to review her movie and be brutally honest about it. The sour ending's abrupt, but this is a good place to start. Miserable is another romance story, but takes a very dark turn when the girlfriend straps Jay to a bed for reasons. The story was risky in how risque it is, but it pays off big time with some big laughs. Marty's first date noticeably suffers from third episode syndrome, if that's a thing. Again, even though this is a period piece, its digs at Cuba don't feel like they were written with tact and grace, and the episode gets a little too nutty to take seriously. I appreciate some things like the arc Marty goes through, but it's not a hit. Dial M for Mother I like for how quickly they wanted to dissect Jay and Eleanor's relationship, and did it well enough to work in any point in the series. I also appreciate how it's about Duke wanting Jay's audience approval rating to go up. I'd say we've all been there. A Little Deb Will Do Ya is the episode where Eleanor threatens to kill Margot's horse over a school dance. I could get over this nasty moment pretty quickly because I can genuinely respect Margot's stance on the school dance, and Jay's subplot where he hates Humphrey the Hippo's an excellent time capsule of that time Americans really hated Barney for some reason. Eyes on the Prize is my favorite episode because it's about Jay's show being in jeopardy and eventually cancelled, and he seriously evaluates his life and how important cinema should be to him. His speech at the end about how if the movie stinks, just don't go. I see that on Twitter from time to time. When a relatively obscure show has such a well-remembered meme like this, it can't be anything but a damn good speech. Every Doris Has Her Day is about Doris, and while a valiant effort at giving her something to do, her and Jay get along through snark is nice, the angle of her potentially being his mother is pretty far-fetched. Not helping is the jokes aren't particularly memorable after the Hunchback of Notre Dame musical. I mean, that's such a ridiculous idea. Marathon Mensch is about Jay running a marathon, then getting lost in New York City. Did they not map out the marathon before initiating it? Did nobody just look out their window and spot him? This knocks a glaring plot hole and easy fat jokes out with one stone. With LAJ, we're back to real classics. Jay's asked to write the one thing he hates, a mindless blockbuster. Specifically, Ghostbusters 3. The best part for me is the end where he gives a ravingly negative review of his own movie. It reminds me of the Nostalgia Critic, but in good ways. Dr. J is about two things that really stick out to me. Digital censorship of old movies to make them more modern, which I, like Jay, am firmly against, and Jay helping find a cure for Duke when he's got a terminal disease. Assisted suicide joke notwithstanding, I love this one on multiple levels. A Day at the Races and A Night at the Opera doesn't strike me as anything very memorable. The plot about Marty becoming a rock star isn't very interesting, and Duke wasn't the sharpest tool in owing money to the public for not finding Jay funny. This one was really upstaged by the Drying Channel joke. Uneasy Rider is trucking boring. Jay's a trucker now because he lost his job again for not endorsing tobacco, and this all feels more like a Congo line of gags than a real story. In A Pig Boy and His Dog, a very animal-themed episode, Eleanor writes a children's book about Jay while he's also dealing with a dog that's growing beyond his control. It's not much, but it's fun for what it is. Kicking off Season 2 is Sherman, Woman and Child, Alice's introduction. It integrates her into the show successfully, while also revealing who she's divorced from and why that's an issue. Jay starts to mellow out now that he's got a real female friend, and that's evident in the legendary dance sequence. Sherman of Arabia puts Jay in the Gulf War a few years prior to when the series takes place, but what can you do? It's one of my favorite of the adventure stories because Jay's whole life is at stake, and it's interesting as a contemporary viewpoint of a now historical event. A Song for Margot is about her falling in love with a member of a grunge band. I am scratching my head wondering what decade this was made in. But seriously, this is Margot's best episode since it gets the closest to letting her grow and develop by dealing with a boyfriend. From Chunk to Hunk is about Jay and Marty going to weight loss camp, but only Marty actually losing weight in the process. I think there are some missed opportunities to get a new Jay out of this, but Marty becoming part of a stage production is a fleshed out enough plot, I guess. Lady Hawk is about Jay having an affair before it can even be considered an affair, and Alice wonders if they're really meant to be. I'm miffed that Jay's the one that gets far more introspection, but as the show's only real dream sequence, I'm happy with how it furthers the relationship. Frankie and Ellie Get Lost is the show's most out there episode, with Eleanor and Franklin becoming stranded on an island, and their new monkey butler having it out for Franklin in particular. What keeps it rooted in common sense is Jay and Margot's reaction to them being missing, and it's nice seeing Jay trying to do the impossible with their money, clean New York. Siskel and Ebert and Jay and Alice is the show's most famous episode, though that's not saying much, since it's about real-world film critics Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert having a falling out and Jay getting entangled in it. The two guys melt into their roles perfectly, and it's a miracle no one told Ebert that John Lovitz was in North. With all the Duke's men, we're back to a more middling experience, with Duke running for president and Jay having to write his baloney speeches. It's your typical running for office episode that's become archaic due to how far real-world politics have devolved since then. But Duke bounces back with Dukerella, where he falls in love with Alice's sister, who's a bit of an attention seeker. The movie references pepper this one perfectly, but it leaves a sour taste that this is essentially where the Critic story ends. Capping things off is I Can't Believe It's a Clip Show. Look, a clip show, guys!
It's thanks.
Yeah, no need to cram all these spoofs together, or have Jay be the subject of a terrorist act. It's remarkable that they took terrorism on a comedy show this seriously pre-War on Terror, but remember to punish me the next time I use remarkable and clip show in the same sentence. Now, last of all, I'll address the yellow elephant in the room. A Star is Burns. A season 6 episode of The Simpsons that heavily featured Jay Sherman as cross-promotion for the show when it debuted on Fox. I don't like this quite as much as the best Critic episodes, since this never goes into Jay's less flattering traits. He's portrayed as this perfect addition to the Simpsons household, and also because without Duke, Jeremy, Alice, or the rest, he doesn't feel dynamic with Springfield. At least, that's how I feel after watching this after his home show. It's still great as a Simpsons episode, with Burns' subplot being one of his best, and many of the side characters being used well enough in the plot of a film festival. At the end of the day, if you have football in the groin, you have the audience eating out of the palm of your hand. One last 32-bit elephant in the room before I conclude. The webisodes aren't good at all, despite being an E for effort, but I'll give you this. Jay transforms into Shrek in the last one. Use this, internet. And that's about it for The Critic. There have been a few scattered cameos by Jay on The Simpsons since its cancellation, but the show itself has had no real exposure since 2001. I don't think it was an excellent show, there were some flaws that can be ironed out, but like I said, I'd love to see Jay react to the likes of Frozen and The Avengers. Can this show get a revival or reboot? Not necessarily in moving format, since 3 notable voice actors on it, Christine Cavanaugh, James Napier, and Doris Grau have passed away, and it wouldn't be the same without them. A comic book adaptation maybe, I don't know. Each show I've talked about so far has had some level of revival being talked about or made, but if The Critic wants to remain a product of its time, I wouldn't mind. Take it from me, it doesn't stink. Jeez, that's 4 shows in a row that were fully made in the 90s. I need to go back to another decade. Duh, I spoke too soon.